Eighth grade, Miss Boyd here. I'm going to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird, chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. So 13 picks right up from the end of chapter 12. And remember, we have Aunt Alexandra, who is now in town, and she is staying with the Finch family for a while. So you find out she's staying there for a while because it's the summer, and remember, the trial is coming up. And there's going to be a lot on Atticus's plate, and for Atticus, he knows he's going to need some help. So she's there to give them a little feminine influence, is what she says. And I'm going to bring you back to what I've talked about in previous videos, is that there are three motherly figures for Scout and Jim, and we've met two. So we have Calpurnia, who's there every single day. She takes care of them with their clothing, their food. She disciplines them. You've got Miss Maudie, who's the friendly, ask advice side. And then here we have the side of a mother that teaches you manners and things that you need to know as far as dealing with individuals and other people. Now, we're not necessarily going to always agree with everything she says or does. But remember, just as much as, and this kind of is a little bit of foreshadowing for you, just as much as Aunt Alexandra is going to rub off on Scout and Jim and Atticus, the Finch family with Atticus, Scout, and Jim are also, they're going to rub off on her too. So keep that in mind, because it is really hard to like Aunt Alexandra, especially at first, but bear with it and see how she changes as the summer continues. So when she's over there, everybody loves her. She's the stereotypical Southern woman. She has teas. She has people over. She talks to everyone, etc., etc. She's out there with Miss Stephanie Crawford and gossiping, and she invites people over, all those types of things. And through her, you also figure out that she's extremely big as far as family, which isn't a bad thing, okay? So she feels like knowing your family is extremely important, which is true. But for her, she takes it to another level in the fact that which family you come from basically tells what kind of person you are and what level in society you are. Okay. So you can tell the Finch family are, as far as social class, they're up there. Nobody has a ton of money, but you can tell they're not hurting. Okay. So you see that brought up in here with the introduction of Aunt Alexandra. Like, it literally says, if you have the last name Crawford, that means you can't mind your own business. I mean, think about Stephanie Crawford, town gossip. Okay. So it's the idea that because of your last name, everybody knows everything about you. So living up to your family name is important for Alexandra. And Alexandra. So you have this scene where they have somebody in their family, cousin Brooke, come over, or cousin Lily Brooke, and Scout has no idea who she is. So that bothers Aunt Alexandra. Okay, so much so that she goes and lets, although we don't see it, she lets Atticus have it. And so at the end of this chapter, you have Atticus come in there and he says things like, your aunt has asked me to try and impress upon you and Jean Louise that you are not from the run-of-the-mill people, that you are the product of several generations, gentle breeding, and that you should try to live up to your name. You can tell right there that doesn't sound like Atticus. Atticus doesn't care what your last name is and living up to your last name, and that you're not run-of-the-mill, that you're better than others. You can tell even when he's saying it, it's the most awkward scene that he doesn't truly believe it. And so in this moment, you can tell that the kids, even the kids in their body language can tell this isn't Atticus. So eventually, in the end, he said, now's not the time to worry and just forget everything I said. It's not important. And then at the end of that chapter, it says, I know what he was trying to do, but Atticus was only a man. It takes a woman to do that kind of work. So that was Alexandra pushing and pushing and pushing. And it was the point where Atticus was like, fine, I'll talk to him about it. And then as he did talk to the kids about their name and what that meant, he's like, this is silly. Just forget what I said. So chapter 14, at the beginning, you have the kids being singled out. Over there are some finches. So you can tell the town, because of Atticus taking on this case, they're being labeled and singled out. And then you also have in there, at the beginning of this chapter, um, you have Scout talk to Atticus and ask, what is rape? Because she has no clue, but she hears everybody talking about it. And you have her say, well, if that's, well, first he gives her an answer, and it's literally the definition. And he says, well, or sorry, not he. Scout says, well, if that's all it is, why did Calpurnia dry me up when I asked her what it was? And Atticus is like, what? So Cal hasn't told Atticus about all this. So through this discussion, Atticus finds out that the kids went to church with Calpurnia and that they want to go back. And Aunt Alexander did not find any of this amusing. And Atticus is like, this is a great story. You can tell he doesn't care that his kids went with Calpurnia to church. And of course, Scout's like, I want to go with her again. And immediately Aunt Alexander says, no, you were not going with her. And Scout's like, well, I didn't ask you. I'm asking my dad. And Atticus is like, hold up. Can't talk to your aunt like that. Apologize. And while she's here, you're going to listen to her. If I'm here, you're going to listen to me. If Cal's here, you're going to listen to her. You can't just go around and dismiss what your aunt says to you. So she apologizes and the kids leave. And then she overhears Atticus and Alexander having a conversation. So you find out Aunt Alexander's trying to get rid of Calpurnia, and Atticus is like, no, I could not live without her. And she's raised my kids as if they're her own. And she's harder on them than I would be. And he literally says, I will not get rid of her. And the day that she leaves is because she wants to leave. We're not doing that. So you see this dance between Atticus and Aunt Alexandra, and where basically Atticus is trying to give a little bit, but he's also standing his ground and learning to stand his ground with things that Aunt Alexandra keeps pushing on him about. So after this, Scout and Jim are in their room, and you have Jim basically tell Scout, you need to leave Aunt Alexandra alone, because if you don't, all she does is worry Atticus about everything. And Atticus is already overwhelmed with the Tom Robinson case coming up. Now, everything he says is true, but for Scout, she's like, who in the world are you? And he says, it's different with grown folks. We grown folks. And Scout's like, we ain't doing this. And so immediately she lets Jim have it and they start fighting. And of course, she loves it because in her mind, she's like, you ain't so old now. And they're fighting and wrestling. And of course, Atticus gets in there and separates them and tells him to go to bed and asks who started it. And Scout says, Jim did. He was trying to tell me what to do. I don't have to listen to him too now. And of course, Atticus just thinks it's hilarious. And he just says, well, if he can make you, then I guess you have to. And of course, he can't make her yet. And Aunt Alexander doesn't find any of this amusing like Atticus does. So it's night. In the middle of the night, they go to bed, and you have Scout come in Jim's room, and she's like, how does a snake feel? Because I'm pretty sure there's one under my bed. And Jim's like, what are you talking about? So they go in there and eventually they find Dill. Dill is hiding under Scout's bed and he's run away from home. And he has this outlandish story that his new father tied him in the basement with chains and left him there. And so Dill worked himself free and escaped and made it here to, or back to Macomb. And they're like, how in the world did you do that? And he talks about he stole some money and took the train and all that kind of stuff. So with Dill having run away, of course, his parents and his nobody knows where he is. So Jim knows he's got to tell Atticus. So they bring in Atticus, and Dill is so upset, he's scared, and in walks Atticus, and Scout's like, "It's okay, Dill. He there's no reason to be afraid of Atticus," which is tells you a little something about Scout and Jim, that they're not afraid of their father, and they feel comfortable talking to him about things, which is what Atticus wants them to do, to talk to him about things that are tough, not other people in Macomb. So Atticus, basically says it's okay, let's get him something to eat, but we're going to have to tell your aunt. And then, of course, he says, for goodness sake, put some of the country back where it belongs. The soil erosion's bad enough as it is. And Dill's like, he doesn't get the joke. And Scout's like, you're filthy. Go take a bath. So they feed Dill. They let him take a bath. They tell his aunt, but his aunt lets him stay and he can spend the night over there. And eventually they go to bed, and Dill sneaks back into Scout's room. So you find out the truth. His father did not chain him in the basement, but he has a new father. His mom did get remarried, but because of that, he feels left out. He feels like he doesn't belong anymore, that his mom and his new stepdad are spending all this time together and they don't really want him. He doesn't feel wanted. And so Dill and Scout talk about getting a baby, and then you find out their ignorance and they don't know where babies come from. They think they come from an island or a man, or a stork drops him down or God drops him down the chimney, and all kinds of craziness. Then right before they go to sleep, Scout asks, why do you reckon Boo Radley's never run off? And you have, in their innocence, a really true statement is that he doesn't really have anywhere to go. Like, Dill has other people that cares for him and know him, but Boo Radley doesn't. So chapter 15, you have a group visit Atticus at night, and it's got Sheriff Tate in it, Link Dees, and they're all talking about the fact that coming up Monday is the trial, and that they're moving Tom Robinson into town in the jail, and they know that's going to mean trouble. And for Jim, he's watching all of this go down out there, and because they're so riled up, he feels like his father is in trouble and that these men are going to hurt him, which isn't true. But they are worried about the fact that the trial's coming and that Tom Robinson is being moved into town, and that there's groups of people that want to hurt him. So for Jim, he's a little worried about people hurting his father. And he asks his father, like, are they a gang? Like, were they going to hurt you? And Atticus tries to get Jim to see that they weren't there to hurt him. So you have Atticus and Alexandra. They've been going back and forth about the Tom Robinson case. And of course, Anne Alexander still feels like she shouldn't, or that Atticus shouldn't be taking this case, but Atticus won't let it go. So it's Sunday. Tom Robinson is moved into town, and that night you have Atticus leave with a light and a chair. And the kids, of course, know this is out of his routine. He takes the car, he's going into town, something's up. So Jim decides after his aunt goes to sleep, to sneak out. Scout and Dill both go, and Jim says, I just have this feeling. He just wants to check on his father and make sure he's all right. So they sneak into town, and they go to the jail. It's by the Macomb Tribune office, and Mr. Underwood is in charge of the newspaper. And they see Atticus from afar, and Jim sees that he's okay. He's just reading, And so they're about to leave when all of these cars pull up. And Jim is like, okay, we can't leave yet. I got to get a little closer. So you get the scene swaps over to where Atticus is talking to these men that you find out have all been drinking. And they also sent Sheriff Heck and his men off on basically a fake call. So Sheriff Tate isn't there to help Atticus. And they look at Atticus and they say, you know what we want. And what they want is Tom Robinson. And what they want is to lynch Tom Robinson before it even gets to trial, which of course Atticus isn't going to let happen. So when all of this is going on and the men are moving in closer to Atticus, Jim runs out there in the middle of this extremely dangerous situation. And of course, Jim can tell that it's dangerous, but Scout doesn't really understand it. So, of course, here's Atticus and his children are there, and it adds another level of intensity to this scene. And of course, Atticus is trying to get his kids, like, Jim, leave, take them home, get out of here. And of course, Jim is not leaving. And one of the men try to pick up Jim, and of course, Scout immediately reacts and starts kicking him. And Atticus is begging, please, Jim, take them home, please. And in here it says, I was getting a bit tired of that, but felt Jim had his own reasons for doing what he did. Again, Scout doesn't get necessarily the severity of the situation that they're in. So for her, she starts looking around at all of the men and she's trying to find a familiar face. And she finds one. And here is the first time you get to meet Mr. Walter Cunningham Sr. Okay. And so she says, hi. And she asks about how his entailment is getting along. So remember, Atticus helped Mr. Cunningham with the entailment, with this land, with the bank. And if you remember, they paid Atticus back with like crops and things like that. And she goes, don't you remember me? Oh, I know your boy. He's in my class and he's really a nice boy. Will you tell him I said hi? And I mean, these men were about to attack. And here's Scout like saying, hey, I remember you. Um, I know your boy. He's so nice. Will you tell him hi? And in her innocence, or in her, it's almost not, she's being a little naive of the situation. Sorry, my phone's ringing. But she has no clue that in this moment, in her innocence, she's putting these men, especially Walter Cunningham Sr., in Atticus's place, in his shoes, if you will. And it's kind of this awkward silence, and she kind of keeps talking like entailments are bad, but it's okay. We'll stick it out together and it'll be all right. And it's just this, they're all just staring at her. And so in this moment, Mr. Cunningham kind of squats down and looks at her and he says, you know, I'll tell my son you said hi. And then in that moment, the men realize this isn't right. We're out. And they leave. And of course, at this point, they decide, okay, now that they're gone, it's safe. And you have Tom Robinson's ask, are they gone? And of course, Atticus says, yes, they won't bother you anymore. They're gone. And so you have another voice come out, and you find out Mr. Underwood was in his office the whole time with a shotgun and was ready to take out any of those men if they decided to harm Atticus or his children. So they decide to head back home, and Dill carries the chair for Mr. Finch. So you can kind of tell Dill kind of realizes this whole situation, this whole scene that just happened was a serious one. Scout, does she realize? Well, you can kind of decide that for yourself as you keep reading. But of course, Jim totally did. And that's why it says, walking toward the office, Dill and I fell into step behind Atticus and Jim. And Atticus and Jim were well ahead of us, and I assumed that Atticus was giving him heck for not going home, but I was wrong. So again, you can kind of tell the severity of the scene that just happened, Scout doesn't necessarily understand that, but Atticus, it says, reached out and massaged Jim's hair, his one gesture of affection. And so you can tell between the two of it, Jim, he was already worried about his father's safety, and he had a right to be, and that's why he wouldn't leave when those men came up. And of course, Atticus isn't going to be upset with his son for that. Now, your next chapters, okay, um, that you have to read when you go through here is 16, okay, and it was talking about breakfast and they were hungry, and we know that the trial is coming up, okay, so we've got Monday, and everybody knows about, like, everybody knows about the trial, okay, so when they're eating breakfast, they're talking about what happened the night before, and that some of those men wanted to hurt Atticus, and that, Jim and them are worried about it. So in here it talks about that Atticus says Mr. Cunningham is basically a good man. He just has his blind spots along with the rest of us. And of course he's talking about Tom Robinson and the color of his skin. And Atticus goes, he might have hurt me, but son, you'll understand folks a little better when you're older. A mob is always made up of people, and a lot of times mobs don't necessarily think for themselves. They just follow somebody's lead in their ignorance. So for him, he's like, people are still human beings, and sometimes they need, like Scout stepping in to understand the perspective of a situation. And that's what Scout did, is kind of made them understand what they were doing and that they shouldn't be doing it. And of course, Atticus warns them not to mess with Walter Cunningham Jr., because of course it's not his fault as far as what his dad did. Now, through here, they go outside and you see everybody coming into town for this trial. I'm talking everybody. And even the foot washing Baptists that yell out to Miss Maudie that she's going to hell because of her flowers. I mean, everyone's going. Of course, Stephanie Crawford's out there talking, gossiping, all of the above. Okay. And of course, you have the kids kind of going around and watching everybody. And I'm going to mention a name to you that's just mentioned slightly, but he'll be important later on, and that's Dolphus Raymond. And he always has a brown paper bag with him that people believe he's drinking out of. That he's drinking whiskey out of that bottle. So just keep that in mind. You're eventually going to um, you're going to learn a little bit more about him. But all it says is that he has a bottle with him that he keeps in a paper bag. There's whiskey in it that he's always drinking, and that he lives by himself, and he lives with an African American. He's married to an African American woman, and they have mixed children. And then it says nobody really knows why he lives the way he does, because he was promised to marry a white woman, and that on the day of their after the rehearsal dinner, it says the white woman he was going to marry killed herself, and they believe it's because she found out that he was really in love with this African American woman that he's with now. And they talk about their kids, that they're mixed babies, but it's like they don't have anywhere to belong, because the people that are white and make them have nothing to do with them, and then the African Americans have nothing to do with them because they're mixed. And it says that he feels bad for them because they don't necessarily have anywhere that they necessarily belong, if you will, in Macomb County. So when you go through here with the trial, of course, the kids want to go in there, and they go into the courtroom, and it describes it to you. There's crowds everywhere, and they're all talking about Atticus. The kids overhear it, and they're talking about Tom Robinson, and you're getting a lot of opinions that the kids are hearing. Tom Robinson, he's guilty, et cetera, et cetera. And then they run into Reverend Sykes. And so they decide that they're going to sit with Reverend Sykes. And so in the courtroom, the whites all sit on the floor, and then all of the African Americans sit up in the balcony, and that's where the kids sit. And it describes Judge Taylor. Remember, he's the one that assigned this case to Atticus. Um, and it says he's got white hair, a ruddy red face, and he is informal in a lot of ways. Like he props up his feet, he'll clean his fingernails with his pocket knife. But he's also strict about certain things, depending on which buttons you push. So people have a good respect for him. Now, they go in here, and it says the witness stand was to the right of Judge Taylor, and when we got to our seats, Mr. Hectate was already on it. So chapter 16 ends with your first witness on the stand, which is Sheriff Hectate. Okay, so that's what chapter 16 ends. So your next grouping of chapters is going to focus all on the trial. That's what it's going to be all about. Okay, so although you've met most of the characters, you're going to be introduced to a few new ones. So make sure you pay attention to those characters and get a feel for their personality. You're going to get some very strong ones. That's the only way I can describe it. Okay, so make sure you're paying attention to that in your next 4 chapters.